So before we get going, just keep a couple reminders before I hand it over to Senator Shaheen. So just a quick note on our format. After we conclude some brief opening remarks, we'll open things up for the question and answer portion. To keep this as organized as possible in our digital setting, I ask that you please go ahead and raise your hand, which you can do so at the bottom of your bar in the reactions tab. I'll call on you, after which I just ask that you say your name and your outlet and pose your question. And then again, please remute yourself after you've done so. So again, with that, thank you all for joining us this morning, and I will hand it over to Senator Shaheen to kick us off.
Thanks very much, Sarah, and thank you. I will echo Sarah's comments, thanking all of the reporters who have joined us this morning, and especially appreciate being on Zoom with my colleagues from Congress, Senator Hassan and Congresswoman Custer and Congressman Pappas, and of course, Kayla Montgomery, who is the Executive Vice President of Public Affairs at Planned Parenthood of Northern New England, and with us to help answer questions when we get to the Q&A portion are Dalia Vidinas, who is the Executive Director of the Equality Health Center, and Sandi Denoncour, who is the Executive Director of the Lovering Health Center. So we are on this morning because on Wednesday, December 1st, the Supreme Court will take up the biggest threat to overturning Roe v. Wade in the history of that decision. In the case of Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization, the case will ask for the first time that the Supreme Court actually overturn Roe. So it would change the ability of women everywhere in the country to make our own decisions about our reproductive health care. We will see when the case comes before the Supreme Court if the new justices will stand by their commitment to uphold precedent on the court. But what this decision highlights is just how important what happens in states are. That's why it is so concerning that the legislature passed in the budget a law that would outlaw abortion after 24 weeks, that would criminalize any doctors who performed abortions, that would prevent abortions even in cases of rape and incest, that would, as I said, put doctors in jail for up to 7 years, require an ultrasound, which you will hear from our medical experts is not something that is needed oftentimes in abortion cases. And so it would require women to have that ultrasound unnecessarily and pay for it out of their own pocket. It would also require audits of clinics that again are unnecessary. And the people who will be affected the most are the women who can't travel outside of the state if they are in need, those who are least able to pay, least able to travel, least able to respond to this decision. And again, as I have said before, I think if we were talking about men who were in this situation, we wouldn't be talking about these kinds of onerous restrictions. And what we're seeing in the live free or die state is unbelievable to me, having seen so much of the commitment in New Hampshire to stand up for individual liberties and freedoms. And this infringement on women's rights, on our privacy, on the attempt to have state control of our personal health, really is what we would see in an authoritarian state. It's not what we would expect in New Hampshire. So we will be watching very carefully what happens on Wednesday, and we will be continuing to fight that the Executive Council should fund Planned Parenthood and the health clinics that are providing critical services to women in the state, and continue to fight at the national level to ensure that we can protect the privacy of women and families in New Hampshire and throughout this country. So with that, let me turn it over to Senator Hassan.
Well, thank you so much, Senator Shaheen. It is good to be here with you and with our entire New Hampshire delegation, which stands united against these attacks on Roe v. Wade. I also want to give special thanks to the advocates who are here joining us today. All that you do to protect women's reproductive freedom and to make sure women have access to complete quality health care. What is fundamentally at stake is that every woman in our country should be able to make her own healthcare decisions and chart her own destiny and have the full independence to do that. Protecting a woman's right to make these decisions is not only essential to their own individual quality of life, but it is really critical to the economic vitality of our families, our communities, and our country. Yet today we stand on the precipice of Roe versus Wade being gutted, while simultaneously seeing politicians across the country, including in Concord, repeatedly try to roll back access to healthcare. This rollback endangers the health of women by limiting their right to access a safe and legal abortion, and it also constrains their rights as citizens in a democracy and in an economy. The case ahead of the Supreme Court, Dobbs v. Jackson, Women's Health Organization, is a direct attack on decades of precedent set by Roe v. Wade. This is one of the most extreme abortion bans in the country, and it would really dismantle Roe v. Wade and take us back to almost 50 years ago, directly harm women in Mississippi and all across the country. And we know that rulings like the one that the plaintiffs in this case are pushing for would be especially harmful to low-income women and women of color. The result would be devastating for women. And the Supreme Court should not put government in front of women's most personal, difficult, and complicated healthcare decisions. I'll continue working with my colleagues to protect the rights enshrined in Roe v. Wade and to help ensure that all women have the individual autonomy that is critical to their ability to thrive and critical to our democracy as a whole. So I thank you all for being on this morning, and now I'll turn it over to my colleague, Congresswoman Custer.
Thank you so much, Senator Hassan. Great to be with you all this morning. Wonderful to be with my colleagues and with our healthcare providers. So we're here because the Supreme Court is poised to make one of the most consequential rulings for women and for literally the quality of our healthcare and access to healthcare in my generation. The state of Mississippi is asking the Supreme Court to overturn the landmark ruling of Roe versus Wade. And as you've heard from my colleagues, Roe versus Wade has been the law of the land for most of our adult lifetime. I was actually in high school here in New Hampshire, and I remember this decision very, very well. And in 1992, when I had just had my children, the Supreme Court upheld Roe versus Wade and the premise of access to abortion rights. And I just want to briefly note David Souter, notable New Hampshire member of the US Supreme Court, and his role with Sandra Day O'Connor in writing that decision, 1992, Planned Parenthood versus Casey. And the words that he used have always stuck with me. A generation of women have come to rely on the precedent of Roe versus Wade in making their life decisions. And the reason I remember that so clearly was that it was very personal to me at that time to have been able to graduate college, graduate law school, move back to New Hampshire, marry my husband, and have children when we chose to have our children. And that's what we're talking about here. That's what precedent, that's what stare decisis, already been decided. That's what the notion is. A generation of women here in New Hampshire and all across our country have come to rely on this decision in making their life choices. We want to make sure that granted state women will live in a country where safe, legal abortion is available and accessible to them as they make their healthcare decisions and their life decisions. And we've seen already in Texas with the decision, the rule that's on the books now in Texas, that life decisions are being made about women in pregnancy. Pregnancy is very dangerous. In Mississippi, where this case comes from, it's extremely dangerous. To continue a pregnancy to term, you have a much higher rate of death for women. So we know this year, Governor Sununu signed a law that would send doctors to jail, as Senator Shaheen laid out, for providing patients with the health care that they need. He signed an abortion ban, think about this, no exception for rape or incest. That is mandatory. If you don't like a mandate about masks or vaccines, how about a mandate for pregnancy? Mandating. This governor would mandate that a woman carry a baby to term, and even if that fetus has died. It's just truly extraordinary, and it's a major step backwards. I was an adoption attorney for 25 years. I've walked the walk. I've worked with over 300 birth mothers making the most personal, private decisions in their lifetime. And I want to just point out that in the House, we passed the Women's Health Protection Act, legislation to codify the constitutional right to an abortion as established in Roe v. Wade. Our work is far from over, but together we are committed as a delegation. And I'll turn this over to my colleague and friend, Congressman Chris Pappas.
Well, thank you very much, Congresswoman, for your remarks. I want to thank the rest of the delegation for their longstanding commitment to reproductive choice. And we do stand together on this issue. And we also stand with the women and the people of New Hampshire in supporting abortion rights. I want to thank the advocates who are here with us, to Kayla, Dalia, and Sandi. We look forward to hearing from you a little bit later. But thanks for the work that you do to defend the rights of your patients and to advocate for good health care for women and families all across the state of New Hampshire. We know this conversation is so important right now. As my colleagues mentioned, oral arguments will begin on Wednesday. And so this work is vital to draw attention to the threats that are being posed by this particular case, but also by legislation that we've seen already passed here in New Hampshire and in other states across the country that place an onerous burden on women and healthcare providers that really is inconsistent with who we are as Granite Staters. So we've got to call this out. We have to realize that we are in a new paradigm here when it comes to access to abortion. You know, the nearly 50 years of precedent that Annie talked about with respect to Roe and then the Casey decision that has guided, our efforts to protect the right to choose really has been upended by the fact that the Supreme Court now has a new radical majority that appears unwilling to support precedent. We saw that where they allowed the Texas law to go forward. This is a very dangerous law that sets a really horrible precedent as we think about what other legislatures might attempt. But we know that with respect to this case, we've got a law that directly challenges Roe and 50 years of precedent. And we've got to be doing everything we can to draw attention to it, to raise the voices of patients and providers, and to try to mitigate the impacts of what we're seeing, both at the federal level and at the state level. We just can't count on the Supreme Court to stand up for Roe and be the backstop as they have been traditionally. And so this is really a new era, and it's up to us to fight back. I am pleased, as the Congresswoman noted, that the House has passed the Women's Health Protection Act. We hope that there's a path forward in the Senate to get this done and codify Roe versus Wade, which is something that is popular, not just here in New Hampshire, but all across the country. I was a co-sponsor of that legislation, but we know that the stakes are raised even higher based on the oral arguments that will start today. Abortion is a deeply personal issue for Granite Staters. And really, this attack on the right to safe and legal abortion is one that we've got to fight back against. The government restricting the rights of individuals to seek the medical care that they want goes against the values that define our state and really our entire country. Because we know that if access to abortion ends as politicians here in New Hampshire and across the country intend, it simply won't infringe on those personal liberties which we hold dear, but it will also have severe health and economic consequences for women and families. And that's just something we can't allow to happen. So I thank you all for being a part of this conversation. I want to turn it over to one of our advocates, Kayla Montgomery, who's Vice President of Public Affairs for Planned Parenthood of Northern New England. Kayla, thanks for your work and for being with us.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Congressman Pappas. It is an honor to be here with you all today, and thank you for having me for this important discussion. I'm Kayla Montgomery, Vice President of Public Affairs for Planned Parenthood of Northern New England and New Hampshire. And I'm proud to be here today representing my colleagues at Equality Health Center of Concord and Lovering Health Center of Greenland. Together, we have 4 locations in New Hampshire that provide abortion care for anyone who needs it, regardless of income or zip code. Our health centers have been providing care for Granite Staters for decades, and our doors will stay open because abortion is essential. Here's the truth. 1 in 4 women of reproductive age in this country has had an abortion. Everyone knows and loves someone who has had an abortion, and we hope that everyone's abortion experience was safe, legal, affordable, and accessible. The decision to become a parent can be one of the most important decisions we make, and we should all have the freedom to plan our futures and choose for ourselves whether and when to have children. But we are at a crisis moment for abortion rights. The threat to the constitutional right to an abortion has never been greater in our country. By next year, 26 states, that's 36 million, or nearly half of US women of reproductive age, could lose abortion access. Abortion is and has been a constitutional right since 1973, when Roe v. Wade was made abortion legal in all 50 states. However, by next year, this landmark decision could be overturned, and this isn't hyperbole. As you've heard, this week, the Supreme Court will hear oral arguments for and against the Mississippi abortion ban. The state of Mississippi is not only asking the courts to allow this abortion ban, they are asking the Supreme Court to overturn Roe v. Wade. This is the first direct challenge to the case in years. What's different is that this time, 6 of the 9 justices have been hostile towards abortion rights in the past. And to be clear, we don't know exactly how the court will rule. They could completely overturn Roe v. Wade. They could allow states to ban abortion, but only up to a certain point. We don't know what the legal status of abortion in this country will look like by next year. But we do know that Roe is the floor and not the ceiling. The legal right to abortion alone has never been enough to ensure that all people, especially people of color and people struggling financially, can access abortion care when they need it. Any effort to further chip away at this right will disproportionately impact those of the same populations. And what does this mean for New Hampshire? While abortion will stay safe and legal in New Hampshire if Roe falls in the near future, there is no proactive protection for abortion access in state law, which leaves us open to further chipping away by hostile lawmakers. Until recently, the New Hampshire legislature has enjoyed a long bipartisan tradition of upholding privacy when it comes to personal medical decisions. In fact, it was then Governor Shaheen who in 1997 repealed the only pre-Roe law on the books with the support of Republican majorities. New Hampshire is one of the most supportive states in the country when it comes to reproductive freedom, but in January, a deeply unpopular and dangerous ban on abortion with virtually no exceptions goes into effect. To be clear, an individual's ability to access abortion care is a matter of equality and liberty. We can't count on the courts to protect our rights. And so we're thankful that the US House, including Representatives Custer and Pappas, have passed the Women's Health Protection Act, and that Senator Shaheen and Senator Hassan have co-sponsored this important legislation. This act, if passed, is specifically designed to protect the right to abortion access nationwide, and we urge the Senate to pass it quickly. But we cannot rely on that legislation alone, and we need to do more in our states. New Hampshire needs to proactively protect the right to abortion and ensure that anyone who needs care is able to access it. We must put Granite State values first and ensure that individuals' access to abortion is protected in New Hampshire. Thank you, and I'll turn it back to Sarah.
Great, thank you, Kayla. And at this point, we're gonna move over into the question and answer portion. And just a gentle reminder to everybody, please, our members of the press, please raise your hand on the tab at the bottom of the screen if you have a question, and remember to mute yourself after you've posed your question. And with that, we're glad to take questions if folks want to go ahead and raise their hands. If we have any questions from anybody. Okay. Well, at this point, I welcome Dalia or Sandi, if there's anything that you would like to add, talking about the impact on our healthcare providers here in New Hampshire.
Hi, thank you, Sarah. I'd be happy to speak for just a moment. So again, I'm Sandi Denoncour. I'm the Executive Director of the Lovering Health Center in Greenland. And I want to thank the delegation here today and everyone for participating. This is such an important conversation, and the national and statewide environment that we're in is truly remarkable. We have not been in this space in decades, and certainly in my lifetime, this fight has never been more timely and important. So I thank everybody for their efforts. I will reiterate that we look at the success of our family planning programs as a direct link to our abortion services, and the fact that we provide far fewer abortions today than we have in the past decade. The success of accessible and affordable family planning services across our state is critical in maintaining a full scope reproductive services. So we thank you for keeping your energy focused on both ends of that spectrum, and your support is critical. Thank you.
And I'm Dalia Vidinas with the Equality Health Center. And again, thank you for the delegation for your unending support for all that we do. And I would like to reiterate exactly what Sandi had said, was that part of reproductive health care in general includes abortion services. You cannot have true family planning services without that critical piece with it. And the effect that it will have on so many of our clients and on residents here within New Hampshire is immense. I think what a lot of people don't realize is that so many of our abortion patients actually are women who have families already. They are making this choice because this is the best choice for their family and the children they currently have. Just last week, we had one woman who said she would have loved to have potentially had another child in her future, but right now she has 3 children and cannot afford more children. She just cannot afford daycare, clothing, getting them to school, doing all of that. And while we have this kind of a system, these are the choices that parents have to make now, is can I truly afford to have another child? And is it fair to bring more children into this world when the parents are already struggling? We hear that constantly. And when you have 1 out of 4 women in their reproductive age, throughout their reproductive age, having an abortion, this is one of the main reasons why. They're looking out for the family they currently have. And we would be disrespecting them tremendously by taking that choice away for what they can do for their current families.
And I want to just underscore a point that you and Sandi both made about the importance of family planning. And because when the Executive Council cuts off funding for Planned Parenthood clinics, it means that families can't do the kind of planning. And so if you don't believe in abortion and you think we should reduce the number of abortions, then you want to provide help for people to get that family planning assistance that they need. And so it's just such a hypocritical argument that we're seeing the Executive Council and others make, the Republican Executive Council and others make about denying access to family planning because that prevents abortions. The other point that I just want to underscore is I'm probably the only one on the delegation who was old enough to remember what life was like before Roe v. Wade for women of reproductive age. And I remember when abortions were done in back alleys. I had friends in college who had to go to illegal abortion providers because of their circumstances. We do not want to go back to that kind of a situation. That is not good for women, it's not good for families, and it's not good for men, ultimately. And we have to understand that these are decisions that are not just women's decisions in families, they're made with their husbands and their doctors and their ministers. So the suggestion that women should not make these decisions on their own is just ridiculous, because women are perfectly capable of making these decisions, and they affect not just women and their families, they affect men as well. So this has the potential to be hazardous to the health of families across this country if the Supreme Court decides to overturn Roe v. Wade.
Thank you. And it looks like we have some questions. So I'm going to go first to Adam Sexton with WMUR. Adam, why don't you go ahead?
Thank you. And Senator Shaheen just covered some of what I was going to ask about, but I'm curious if members of the delegation would like to chime in on that aspect of, because the pre-Roe world is so far away in memory, if they think that perhaps, even though there is a very healthy activism around the issue, if they think that generationally so few women or people being aware of what life was like without abortion rights, if that's kind of impacted or muted this debate in some way.
I don't know if it's muted the debate. I do think it's important for us all to remember that the recognition of women as full and equal citizens has always been on this progression in our country. And, we just celebrated the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage. We are now just short of 50 years since Roe v. Wade. It is a reminder that we always have to make sure that the rights of each and every member of a democracy are recognized and supported. And this is about the most private and sometimes complex decision in terms of healthcare a woman can make. But to the point that some of our advocates have also made, this is about their destinies, their families. And this is really about trusting women as capable, moral decision makers in a complicated world. And I think it may be that many younger people are kind of used to taking that respect for granted. But this is a real reminder, the Mississippi case that the court will hear, that our rights are under assault right now. And we have to really stand up and remind people what's at stake, and remind people about what it was like before Roe was the law of the land.
Adam, I would just add, having been at the march in January of 2017, the Women's March, and the Women's Marches all around the country. I was in Washington, D.C. with well over 1 million people, women, and the men who love them. I was there with my son and my husband. And I think women of every age are very, very aware of the potential threat of right-wing politicians who want to take away our life decisions. And I appreciate Senator Shaheen pointing out that it goes beyond irony. It's the absolute hypocrisy of the decisions that we are now living with, to have this governor sign an abortion ban when easily 75%, 3 out of 4 Granite Staters, it's probably even higher in the Granite State. Our polling is higher in my district. But across this country, recent polling within the last couple of weeks, 3 out of 4 Americans want Roe versus Wade to be the law of the land. We reached a status quo in this volatile issue that works for the American people, less government interference in people's personal lives. And I can tell you, since the governor signed that abortion ban in New Hampshire, and I think you saw his favorability drop 10 points just in the month of August, as I've been out and about, I am amazed at the number of people that bring this up with me, not just women. Men of all ages do not want to go back. This is the fundamental core of women's autonomy of whatever age, to be able to make your own life decisions, to be able to finish your education, to be able to start your business, to, as I really appreciate Dalia pointing out, to be able to raise the family that you have. This is a very difficult time. Families struggled through COVID. and they struggled at home with young children and the cost of childcare. And we're bringing relief. We are bringing relief with the bills that we're passing in Washington. But people know how close to the edge they are. They don't have the resources, the energy to raise one more child that could tip the whole thing over, could tip their marriage over, so that then you're a single mom raising more kids than you can afford by yourself. This is a societal issue, and it couldn't be more fundamental to our autonomy and who we are.
And I don't think I could add anything to what the other members of the delegation already said. I think they said it so well, but I do think there is a younger generation that just doesn't have a reference point for this conversation in the way that maybe older generations do. And so there is certainly an education process that's going on, but we have seen for the last several years the impact of some of these really onerous laws that have been passed at the state level. We're seeing a direct impact on women in Texas right now. And there will be a reaction to that. And I think the mobilization that has happened over the last few years to stand up and to speak out for reproductive freedom will only continue as we move forward, because this is just a direction that runs against what people are looking for from government. They don't want more government interference in their day-to-day lives. They want to ensure that their personal freedoms and liberties and access to healthcare is protected. And so, I think that's what we're going to continue to see as we move forward, a potential awakening here of folks who either have took this issue for granted or are just learning about the adverse impacts that are in store.
Right, and I think that the only thing I'd add to finish this up, I hope, is just to, I think it was Kayla's point, if 1 in 4 women have abortions, it may be that they might think in their own state abortion restrictions wouldn't ever happen, but here they are. So this is a real issue for not only the 1 in 4 women who've had abortions, but for the people who love them.
Thank you. And next, I'm going to go to Anne Marie Timmons with the New Hampshire Bulletin. Anne Marie, why don't you go ahead?
Thank you. This is a question for our providers. I was wondering if you could say what you're seeing or hearing so far from patients, both in terms of concerns about the abortion ban or the new requirements with ultrasound that are coming, but also any kind of funding decisions you've had to make in terms of not offering your sliding scale to as many people or having to increase cost or reduce services. Thank you.
So I'd invite one of our providers if they wanted to share there.
Sure. Thank you, Anne Marie. I will say that what we've heard from patients, particularly in the past handful of weeks, is a real dismay about the fact that within a couple of months, the decision that they made to seek care with us could be significantly impacted. And such relief and gratitude that their ability to make that choice now is in fact intact. I think that for women who face this decision directly, there's a very deep and personal understanding of what the right to access and the right to choice could look like in a handful of months. And that sense of relief, that while that's very real for them, is such a sign in my mind of how ill-treated and disempowered women making this decision feel right now and have felt for decades, and why cementing Roe versus Wade and upholding Roe versus Wade is so critically important. It's a foundational empowerment. And when that is under threat, it is so obvious when we hear from our patients how grateful they are, not just for the quality of service they receive, but for the fact that they could receive service and could make a choice. And they should never have to feel that. They should feel supported. They should be healthy as possible. And we should be able to help them support their future choices for themselves and their family without all of the pressure that they currently feel. I will say that the Lovering is in the process of making decisions about what service delivery looks like in an environment without family planning funding from the state or federal Title X funding. And we are making those decisions in the next 90 days. We've been lucky to be able to provide continuing service while we make those adjustments. But those debates, I believe, will be in front of us again in a few short weeks as well. So that is well worth paying attention to locally.
And again, I would like to reiterate everything that Sandi said, just having patients feel such relief. We've had actually, I think, more patients crying afterwards, saying that they can't believe that this is a threat, the fact that they may not be able to look at their families the same way, knowing that they can't plan them the way they feel that they would want to. I do want to share with you that I did have one very irate young woman come in who spent hours and hours researching abortion and came up with several sites that show that abortion has been around for over 4,000 years. There is actually printed information about abortions going all the way back to 4,000 years. And this woman came into our office and said, we've been downtrodden for 4,000 years. Can't they just stop? Can't we just rely on our own bodies and say, 4,000 years later, can't we just finally be trusted to know that we know what we need and what we need to do for ourselves? And I just found that very like, wow. She's not going to be a volunteer for us. But I've been seeing a lot of sadness, but also a lot of anger. And a lot of younger women saying that I am an educated person. Why can't you trust me? What's going on that you can't trust me? I'm not going out with a gun, shooting people in the streets or during protests. I just want to protect myself and my family. And so I've been seeing a lot of anger as well as sadness and dismay. So it's been a real mix. And we've already looked at the rejuggling of our services, our sliding fee scale, and there will be market differences, starting in January. We don't have a choice. We will not be able to afford to continue the services that we are serving, even though people have been very generous with donations since all of this has happened. It's just not going to be enough. And we will have to pass that cost on to our patients, which means that especially our patients who are uninsured or underinsured with the $5,000 deductible, $10,000 deductibles, which are still fairly common, come January, they won't go for birth control options because that goes towards their deductible and they can't afford it. And so you're locking them into situations that it's just very difficult for them, and adding stress onto already raising a family, the pandemic, trying to work, trying to do this. And some of our patients, they're just really struggling with all of this lack of choice and lack of support. And thank goodness for our delegation here in New Hampshire, because we are one of the few states that are out there that are really working so hard on women's behalf. And I just want to thank you again for that so much.
I echo my colleagues. I'll just add that at Planned Parenthood Northern New England, we have already seen a handful of patients from Texas who couldn't get the care that they needed in their home state, and they've had to travel across the country. And luckily, of course, we were able to provide the care that they needed, but it's certain that we will see more of these patients from Texas and from other states in the coming months, in the coming years. And it's really critical that we're looking at abortion access in Northern New England, 10 years, 20 years out from now, and really thinking about the long term, because we know that there are many states that will become like Texas, whether or not the Texas ban is stopped or not.
Great, thank you. And just making sure we're getting close to the end at this point. So unless are there any other questions out there? Okay, then at this point, we can conclude. Senator Shaheen, did you want to offer any brief closing remarks before we wrap things up?
Thank you to everyone who's joined us. Special thanks to Kayla and Dalia and Sandra for all of your continuing effort to provide the health care that women need in the state. And to my colleagues in the delegation, as we've all said, this is an issue we're going to continue to do everything we can to address. And I hope the Supreme Court is listening to the people of the United States. Because to go back to Adam Sexton's question, I think if you want to see a revolution, go ahead, outlaw Roe v. Wade, and see what the response is of the public, particularly young people. Because I think that will not be acceptable to young women or young men. Again, thank you all. We will continue to work on this issue.
Great. Thank you all. And if you have any follow-up for Senator Shaheen, please contact me. For Senator Hassan, Laura, for Congresswoman Custer, Jen, and Congressman Pappas, Colin. Thank you all very much.